We got a Fox News alert, a major update in the case of the Maryland man, Kilmer Abrego Garcia. He's the illegal migrant sent to the maximum security prison in El Salvador for a while and later returned to the U.S. to face human trafficking charges. He pleaded not guilty. Today, a federal judge in Tennessee ordered the release of Abrego Garcia from custody while he awaits trial. Now, a separate judge in Maryland ruling shortly after that immigration authorities, ICE, must allow him to return to Maryland, blocking the Trump administration from detaining him upon his release from criminal custody in Tennessee. So they can't pick him up. That same judge ruling ICE must also provide 72 hours notice before deporting him to another country. Joining me now is former acting DHS Deputy Secretary Ken Cuccinelli. Ken, shocked he's out?
I am shocked he's out. I mean, this isn't just about the human trafficking charges where he was caught more or less dead to rights, but the full context of this guy's rap sheet isn't somebody you would let out easily. I mean, you're supposed to judge a flight risk. I can hardly think of a more likely flight risk, and yet this judge lets him walk. And of course, within minutes, the Maryland judge, Obama appointee, puts an immigration order in place to try to block ICE from doing their job. This is essentially using a criminal proceeding to block immigration enforcement, and there's nothing in the law that allows that. The federal government can do both of those things at the same time. I mean, they can criminally prosecute him and they can process him or remove him on an immigration basis at the same time. But these judges are trying to stand in the way of that.
Right. Just keep in mind, he was originally sent to El Salvador, where he belongs. He got here illegally, and he wasn't allowed to stay there because of fear of a rival gang, who, by the way, has since been scooped up in El Salvador, no longer a threat to that country. Now it's one of the safest in the region. And Kilmer Abrego Garcia is a despicable guy. I mean, domestic abuse. He's been accused of unlawful transportation of undocumented aliens. Remember the video that we saw in 2022 of a van full of people? He's got $1,400 worth of cash. Then we have two witnesses by the government saying he's part of a human smuggling operation. But that wasn't good enough for this Obama judge.
And that was under the Biden administration. So, you know, this is not like it was a Trump administration story. That all happened under the Biden administration. And this guy isn't a Maryland man. He's an El Salvador man who invaded this country and doesn't belong here. I will say this, in light of recent Supreme Court rulings, the only thing I think that is correct in the Maryland judge's ruling is the notion that under the Supreme Court ruling, this guy would have to be given 72 hours notice before being removed from the country. But the judge is trying to block him from being removed from the country at all, and there's no authority on the judge's part, in my view, to do that.
Is there a chance that ICE is going to just pick him up anyway?
Yes. So we got a Maryland judge. The jurisdiction of the Maryland judge is, well, Maryland. And Garcia is being held or released in Tennessee. He's got to get from Tennessee to Maryland, and he's not going to go through this judge's jurisdiction to get there. So if I were ICE, I'd be waiting to pick him up in Tennessee. I wouldn't wait for him to get to Maryland. I would never let him get into that judge's jurisdiction if I intended to remove him. And then I'd comply with the Supreme Court notice provision for removal, and then I'd remove him. And this story would be over.
Yeah, and basically you also think this might be a situation where he figures it out, and maybe he is one of the million that chooses to self-deport.
Right. Well, which is part of the reason that the Tennessee judge is in a little bit of a ludicrous position in terms of the release terms that this guy could walk. But one of the places he could walk is right out of the country. He walked into the country without going through a legal port of entry. He could walk right out and jump all of this due process, including our criminal process.
Ken, he was picked up hanging out with gang members. The judge who first heard his case thought he was a gang member. Then he beats his girlfriend/wife twice, accused of that. and then he's with human trafficking. What more does a person have to do to get kicked out of this country? It's insane. Thank you, Ken. Appreciate it.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.